Okay. Well, most everybody's on here. We want to be good steward of everybody's time, of course, and there's been a lot of interest in this subject for 9 months or more, and maybe this can be a chance to kind of get it moving forward. I know it's a different type of situation than what we all were imagining when we first started talking about community gardens, but the idea here is to try and get some of the interested parties together and maybe hear a little bit from some people that have experience with community gardens to get some ideas on how to best go forward with that. So I'm going to pick on a couple of people with MU Extension to jump in. Police Chief, good to see you, Darren. And
we're trying to kick him out.
Yeah, good luck with that. And of course, this community garden idea, I think, the land that's been given is over there on the west side of Ash Grove, close to the vet clinic. It is fenced in. It's next to the well, so there's discharge water and other water available. There's a gazebo now there too. I understand it's been moved there. But as far as raised beds or dirt and mulch and all those things, that's still yet to be done. And as well as someone who's coordinating that, or we're planning on whether this is something that's that people rent plots or if it's being raised strictly to be given away. I mean, those are all things that need to be decided at the local level, not by me, of course. So there's some folks on here that can give some ideas on maybe directions to go that can be a success and things to avoid. And Kelly McGowan and I think Bill McKelvey would be the two to tap in that area based on their experience. And maybe Kelly, you want to go first, and then we'll jump into Bill and some of his guidance as well. I know you work with several community gardens in Springfield, some that have flourished and some that have failed. And
yeah, so you probably have heard of Springfield Community Gardens, and basically Springfield Community Gardens is a group here in Springfield that kind of oversees several community gardens in different areas around town. And within my job, I have worked with several garden leaders at different gardens. And some of those gardens have been really successful, and some of them are just grown up in weeds. It really comes down to the leadership of that particular garden and having a good leader who is going to kind of oversee it on a day-to-day basis and make decisions and just kind of be the go-to person for that garden. But boy, if you can get a good leader and someone that's passionate about running it, it can just be really a community asset and just a place for people to come together and grow vegetables and learn, and it could be a good place for kids to come out, and just a lot of good positives that I'm sure you guys already know about. But probably my number one piece of advice is just having a really good, strong leader to be there day to day.
I know one of the people that come into our office a lot that you work with is Carl Redman.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about Carl. Carl is one of my master gardeners, and he would be okay with me telling you his age. I think, David, is he 81 or 2?
Yeah.
And he can outwork me in the garden. And he has a community garden at his church, and he is there every day. He's got a group of people that work with him, and I think gardening has really just kept him young and vibrant. And I mean, he's out there like digging irrigation lines and working in the heat, and he's just a pretty amazing person. But he's just a really good example of a success story. And if some of you folks in Ash Grove that are thinking about doing a community garden ever want to go out and meet him, he's also a good mentor to people who want to start their own garden as well. So maybe if things ever return to normal, we can figure out something where you can go meet him.
He does the garden that's behind Wesley United Methodist Church on Republic Road, and it is a sizable community garden.
Yeah, and it's just really a really nice garden. Yeah.
And I think they rent plots to individuals, and they also raise a lot with their church to donate to the food pantry.
Yeah, they do. Certainly people can rent plots. They have a section that's purely organic, and then they have a section that's not, and they have fruit trees and blackberries and just about anything you can imagine they have there.
So local leadership is the key to success from your perspective.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Bill, you're the one that wrote the book or the guide sheet for the publication on this. I know you've talked with a lot of different groups, and maybe what guidance you would have, or the first places to get started, even the first types of action items that need to be done.
Yeah, I think that Kelly's point about leadership is really important. I've seen a lot of gardens succeed with good leaders, and I've seen gardens struggle when there's been transition in leadership. So that is definitely key. I would also say that, kind of thinking about sort of what type of garden would be most appropriate. There's lots of different ways to organize a garden and to set up a garden. The garden that was mentioned on Republic Road sounds like they have plots for individuals and families to use and to do their own thing. Sounds like there's some shared space as well where people are growing food together for donation. And so I think, one way to sort of kind of find out what people are interested in is to have a couple of exploratory meetings. So this meeting today is excellent. I would also encourage you all to think about maybe having some type of a meeting. And I realize that doing this face-to-face may be a challenge, but finding some way to get input from the folks who would be potential users of this site, to kind of find out what type of garden are they looking for. And you may not be able to meet all of those needs right from the beginning, but at least you've taken some input and you have some idea about what the community is most interested in. And I think that a lot of the most successful gardens do tend to kind of serve multiple needs. Some people are really in it for the gardening, and their purpose and motivation is to grow some food for themselves and their families. And I think that's awesome. Other folks are perhaps more community minded. And so they may be interested in growing food for donation. They may be more interested in social events and some of the other things that community gardens can facilitate. And so you tend to have people coming kind of to these projects with lots of different sort of motivations and intentions, and it's good to be aware of those things.
I'll have to add those together. Can I call you back in just a moment?
And I guess the other thing I'll mention just at this point, and then I'll stop, because I think that, a lot of these kind of ideas can kind of get fleshed out through discussion, is to think about how the garden can be organized in a somewhat flexible way. I've been involved in a couple of garden projects where there were some challenges, I would say, with giving people kind of more freedom to kind of come and go as they please, to access water as they needed to access water, to have access to the shed, which had the tools. There was an idea at one particular place where those items needed to be sort of highly monitored and restricted to certain hours. And what you find is that people have all different types of work schedules. They have different types of family commitments. Some folks can maybe come in the morning, some folks can maybe come in the evening, some folks can come in the middle of the day. And so trying to find a way to kind of keep the garden open as much as possible, I think is important and can help to facilitate having lots of different types of people be involved. So I could go on perhaps, but I think that's probably, those are a couple of highlights, and that's probably a pretty good place for me to stop at this moment.
All right. Yeah, the area that we have there, I think is can potentially bring some improvement to that neighborhood and that whole area. I think there's a lot of advantages to where they've picked and what they've worked out with the city. So hats off to the community there. Kelsa Ferguson is our nutrition specialist. So she works with a lot of organizations, food pantries and beyond, with food issues and local food issues as well. Kelsa, anything else you would like to add to the subject before we kind of open it up for conversation from everybody?
I don't think I have a lot to add right now, but I'm excited to be a part of it and help on those aspects and getting different agencies involved in Ash Grove too.
Okay. Well, perhaps maybe this is a point to ask for questions or guests that are participating. There's several of you. Please jump in, unmute yourself, and jump in with questions, conversations, issues.
David, it might be interesting to hear just how we got to this point, maybe, and kind of where we are right now. This came from the city of Ash Grove gave this plot, and are they paying for it, or has any of that been decided yet? Like, is there a budget for it?
There may be some others need to fill some of this in. With Leadership Ash Grove, participants all put together proposals that were pitched at the graduation event. And one of the proposals was about a community garden. Jacob Marler presented that idea. And he may know better, probably better than I. Apparently, community garden was something that had been discussed before around the city hall, maybe for a year or two or so, before Jacob even came along and shared the idea as part of Leadership Ash Grove. And then we had some follow-up meetings even after that program ended, just lunch conversations. And I know John Waterman was very interested in the community garden. It just kind of seemed to keep coming to the top of conversations about something that could involve the whole community. And even Jordan Miller, the manager at MFA, even offered seeds and some materials to help with raised bed gardening. He made, an offer with some of that. Liberty Utilities had mentioned their availability perhaps to help construct raised beds or to do mulch like they have on some other projects in the past. So there were certainly those parties that were coming to the top with interest. And then I think Jacob spoke with the city about using that piece of land there. And then beyond that, others need to maybe fill in some more holes there.
Thank you, David.
Others maybe being Jennifer, Melissa.
So Melissa,
I've never had a problem with people not being able to hear me before.
this is the one and only.
This is true.
Okay.
Okay, so we have we have a fenced-in area, which makes the community garden a great spot. So we already have the fenced-in area. What I was saying was we don't have it. Still doing that. We don't have it as a budget item because we're in the middle of a budget right now. Get Marla back behind me. So I don't know what that looks like at the moment. We have that area, we've moved the gazebo from off of Main Street down there. So the people that are working on it will have shade, a covering, you know. Anybody else want to add anything? What other questions were there?
Did they hear you about the water source?
Oh, okay. So the other thing that I was talking about was where the location of it is where our city well is. That well purges, is that right? It
Yes.
purges, it purges every day. So there's a water source there. Anybody else have anything?
That way, we're not wasting the water that we have running out on the ground in the past. We're going to utilize it by getting it somehow over into a tank, out into the garden area where everybody can use it. And then if there's a drought time, or sometimes that isn't enough water, then we'll also have it where Public Works can fill that with a hose so that there is water there to maintain the garden.
That is a big asset.
Tyler, what were your other questions? Did I answer what you were asking?
Bill, were there other questions you had there? Or Tyler was asking sort of.
It was Tyler that asked those questions about
history
the budget and stuff.
brought together.
Yeah, no, that's great, Melissa. Thank you.
Where's John? John's not talking. I thought, John, where are we at with getting it started?
I know. Well, this call was a big part of getting it going, getting the input from the professionals. One thing I wanted to ask was about the type of garden. I know, just hearing some feedback from people in the community, a lot of them want to be involved. And in our community, it seems a lot of people are interested in being able to give that food to those in need.
Okay.
And I was wondering how well those work when it's a dedicated purpose, whether we should go for a dedicated purpose or go for the individual plots where people can, rent a space.
My personal opinion on that is that those two purposes can work pretty well together, and that you can, in some ways you can attract more people overall to the space if you make those two purposes part of the garden. And so I feel like if you have the space, and especially if there is the interest in the community to do one or the other or both, I would encourage you all to kind of keep that open at this point and to think about how it might work to accommodate both types of gardeners. Because I could easily see that folks who came, say primarily to have their own plot, could very well be engaged as volunteers in the more communal effort of raising food for donation. If they're going to come and spend 30 minutes to an hour weeding their own tomatoes, well, they could spend 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes over on the other plot or participate in some other ways. So I feel like it would enhance the overall project if both ideas were incorporated.
And as far as getting involvement, a lot of the communication goes on with, social media as far as Ash Grove goes. But what are some ways that we would go about getting different groups to not just to buy in, but maybe to get involved? And also I want to comment, I took down the size of the place a little while back, and it's 165 feet by maybe 85 feet or something like that. So it's not a huge space. That's why I was asking about the dedicated use, because I looked at some of the Springfield gardens, the Springfield community gardens, and they have quite a bit more in than we do. It looks like.
Well, that has the potential to be double that size. I think that we own more than just where it's fenced off.
Right.
But we were in the beginning, we were just trying to find a place that it,
Right.
With
A
the
good
water
starting.
source, with the, already has a fenced in area
Mhm.
for the, the protection of it and to keep out vandals and, have that type of thing.
And sometimes starting small is a good thing. You can start small, and then as interest increases, you can, broaden your space out. So it sounds like you have some good room to expand there if you need it.
And I'll add as well, and that's a really good point, Kelly, about starting small. If 100% of your interest right now is coming from folks who are interested in kind of growing on a shared plot for donation, then maybe that is the place to start. So, and that's a question. Have you had folks reach out to you who are seeking to have their own plot? Like, are folks kind of talking about that, or?
Yeah.
I've hesitated. I've put too much out there on social media just to keep, because I wanted to talk to you guys first and talk with our leadership group and know who was going to be involved and everything, because I'm afraid that once I open those floodgates, it's going to be a mess.
So if we're opening it up for individuals and you're saying it's renting a space, is that what all the other places do, or you just get a space? How does that, and if they're renting it, how do you determine what a reasonable price is?
So that's a good question, and it varies from garden to garden. In some gardens, renting is more like people are given a space, but I do think that perhaps attaching some type of fee, even if it's a deposit for the space, does encourage a little bit more follow through and accountability. And so it could be that there was a nominal fee that was either charged or used as a deposit for someone to have their own space. And if they met certain conditions and at a minimum took care of their plot throughout the year and cleaned it up at the end of the year, maybe they would get their deposit back, or maybe it's just a fee. Maybe it's $20 or maybe it's $15. It's probably not going to be so high that it covers all the costs of the garden, but it's a small investment perhaps that people are asked to make in order to participate.
So is it just we open those gates up in the morning and somebody's designated to lock it up at 8 o'clock at night, or or does everybody get a key?
So one of the fenced gardens in Columbia that I'm involved with has a combination lock on the gate. And so basically it's open at all hours. People come and go as they please, and people have the combination to the lock and are expected to lock up if they're the last one there.
Okay.
There's an area, at Wilson Rutledge Farm in Springfield, the parks rents out spaces for a community garden on the east end of that park.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I know Kelly may correct me or remember better than I think their fee was $10 a month. It's pretty minimal. Maybe it was 10 overall.
Yeah, I can't remember. It wasn't very much.
I think more than anything, they really wanted people to take ownership and maintain their areas. And that, people putting in sweat equity and being involved was even more important. But it kind of takes, a local leadership, somebody reminding people of that, and regular communication and stuff too.
So you have to do your own tools, or you're saying that there's a tool shed? Some of them have a tool shed and community tools, like everybody brings their own, or that $10 or $20 goes towards purchasing something that you use with the garden?
So a lot of gardens do have a shed where there are tools stored that are shared by the community. Those tools may get to the garden through different sources. So it might be that the fee is used to purchase tools. There may be a small grant. There may be other contributions. Folks may scour garage sales and people's garages to kind of do a tool drive. But yeah, in some form or fashion, folks are able to acquire a few tools that they keep in the shed that everybody has access to.
Kelly, I know out the demonstration gardens, the shed and tools that grow legs
Yeah.
is a constant challenge
At
for
least
you.
something's growing.
Yeah, just keep that in mind. You know, if you do have a shed with tools in it, you know, I just some of the gardens that I know about, they've been broken into. The tools have been stolen. So just keep that in mind. I don't know how secure of an area this is that you're talking about, but that sometimes can be an issue.
That kind of can add to frustration for volunteers, you know, that are,
Yeah.
It's not really, it's on the edge of town. It's on the industrial drive street.
Right.
Okay.
So there won't be a lot of, it's a dead end street where it's on. So there's typically not a lot of traffic there. But we're advertising that the community garden is there, so everybody will know.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's some secret or anything, you know.
I will add that, you know, the different types of gardens, whether it's shared gardening for donation or it's individual plots, they do take different types of management. So in terms of what a garden leader might do as the leader and the manager of the site, you know, if it's a shared space growing for donation, you know, that's a certain type of coordination. So you have to kind of coordinate groups and kind of coordinate planting schedules and figuring out what you're going to plant, maybe setting up work days to take care of that space a couple times a week, and doing that type of management. Whereas with the individual plots, it's really a quite different type of management in that the garden leader would need, for example, a map with the different plots sort of outlined on the map. They would have to be delineated sort of out in the ground somehow. People are then assigned to their plots. And at that point, you know, people are somewhat on their own in that they've been assigned a plot. You know, hopefully there are other means of support for folks if they're new to gardening or something like that. So if there's ways that they can participate in educational workshops or activities or just learn from other gardeners, maybe find some help with turning over their soil and things like that. And then, you know, they're kind of expected to sort of keep that up. And in terms of the garden leader's role in that activity, you know, they may be sort of needing to check in with folks over time. You know, if they observe that a plot that was assigned to somebody hasn't been utilized for 2 to 3 weeks and it's overgrowing in weeds, they're going to have to follow up and find out what's going on. There's oftentimes, you know, like a system in place where if people are not responsive, then the group may sort of reclaim that plot and then it can be reassigned to somebody else. In either scenario, there's often work days, you know, so there's almost always sort of common chores that need to be done at the garden, whether it's trimming around the fence or mowing or maybe installing a shed, cleaning out the shed, things like that. So those are things that a garden leader would also, you know, really kind of work to encourage and try to get people out to kind of engage in some of these sort of shared chores.
Now, do you suggest for the first year? Okay, so it's a grass field right now. I mean, we mow it, but it's grass. So we've done nothing to amend it at this moment. So I was wondering, like, if we did raised bed, like everything is in pots or something, or and correct me. I'm just throwing this out there, like the straw bale thing, where people plant in the straw bales.
Mm-hmm.
And then like next year we can take those bales and then amend the soil with them, plow it up and
compost.
And so maybe our first year that's the first step, or is that not a good idea?
I mean, I would think you might do some limited straw bale gardens. I mean, if your ground is pretty good and you get a soil test and things look pretty good, I mean, I would kind of go more the route of trying to
Actually plow
either plow or till that
Okay.
ground to grow in the ground if you have good soil.
Yeah, I just didn't know how long the process is. So like I said, it's May. We haven't done anything to the
Yeah.
ground at this point. So if we get somebody in there to plow it, it's got all the grass in there still. So you have
Yeah.
to wait a certain amount of time and then till it again, probably. So we're talking 2, 3, 4 weeks.
I would defer to Kelly on this one. But I think you're right. You'd be looking at some time period there.
Yeah, I would be really hesitant to plow up that area and then plant in it this year, just
Right,
because
that's what I'm
if there's grass right now, you're just going to constantly be fighting out that grass all summer. Ideally, you would have started last fall trying to kill out that grass, and it would have made a better planting area. So your best bet may just be to go with raised beds this year, if possible. And that might just be easier maintenance anyway.
Right.
Kelly, is it
And you could,
go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to add, you might start with raised beds and kind of map out an in-ground area that you started working on as well. So you'd have a combination of options
Yeah,
there.
that's a good idea.
So we could start with raised beds this year and then pick out areas where we're going to start killing off the grass. So weed barrier down to kill the grass off and start on a maintenance, like just start tilling up the ground this fall or start it this summer.
So as far as your in-ground gardening areas, yeah, I would probably start this fall trying to kill out the grass. And you can do that a number of different ways. And we can talk about that later on. But yeah, that's going to be probably something you'll want to start working on this fall.
Okay. And can you, if you are doing the straw, I don't know how much straw bales cost. I've never done that in a garden. I just wonder. So would you, like the next season, be able to till that into the garden, or is that not a good idea?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Decomposing straw makes a wonderful soil amendment, so it can certainly be used to kind of incorporate into the soil. Now, as far as straw bale beds, straw bale gardening, a lot of people really like that method. Now, that's something that it takes a little bit of prep work. So when you buy a straw bale, it's probably going to be $6 to $8 per bale, and you have to kind of let it start to decompose before you plant in there. And so kind of the way that works is there's a whole like schedule of how to do it, but you just kind of start adding water to it, and then it'll start to slightly decompose. And then when it starts to slightly decompose, then it's kind of ideal for planting in. If you just go buy a straw bale, it's really tough to plant in right away because it's really tightly packed. And trust me, I've tried it. That's why I'm saying that. But yeah, you kind of have to plan ahead for that too.
Okay, so that might not be an option for this year.
Yeah, I think the raised beds would probably be your best option, and kind of having a few of those and kind of going from there. And those can be put together pretty inexpensively. And then you can just add your own soil in and then you're ready to go.
Did I see that somebody commented that they were trying to gather mineral barrels from the farmers and they were willing to bring those in? Because that would be a contained area and raised.
No, when you're doing the containers like that, do you put a weed barrier down so you're not just getting all weeds everywhere else?
Well, so if it's those big black mineral tubs that I think they're
Yes.
talking about,
Yeah.
those would make great planting beds. And you don't have to put down weed barrier. I mean, certainly you can, but you don't have to. But if you want to use those as planting beds, you will need to make sure that there's drain holes drilled in the bottom so that they're not just holding water. But those,
Right.
a lot of people have good success with those.
Do you all have access to soil and compost at the city? Like you have your own supply?
No.
No.
You end up
No, and I was
Fire.
actually going to ask the question on compost. So it's good to have a compost pile in your community garden, but you want to just limit that to plant material, not somebody bringing in stuff from their house or anything, right?
Yes and no. So having a compost heap there at the garden is certainly a good idea. Compost is a wonderful soil amendment. If you are going to do that though, you're going to have to limit what you put in that compost pile. And so an example of that would be like at the end of the season, tomato plants that have started to die, you wouldn't want to compost any kind of diseased plant material.
Well, right,
because
and it'll
those-
happen, so.
Yeah, because those diseases will survive the composting process and then that compost can be contaminated. So it is a good idea if somebody's actively managing that compost pile. But you know, the city of Springfield has their yard waste center and they make their own compost. And our extension office actually does the compost analysis for that. And it is some really great stuff. They do a fabulous job and the price on it is very, very reasonable. So maybe that would be a resource for getting some stuff to fill up your beds. Now you wouldn't want to fill the raised bed up with straight compost. You want to kind of do a mixture of compost and garden soil. But yeah, it's great stuff. So I would probably go with that if you could.
We've done a 50-50 mix with some of the raised beds that I've helped make before. And Kelly, I don't know if that's the ratio you were thinking, but
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too.
yeah.
A 50-50 with compost and what?
Soil,
Yeah,
topsoil.
Topsoil.
Just regular topsoil.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would interject. My knowledge comes from my sister, who's a master gardener and who does go to Wesley Church. So I'm going to have to see if she's involved in that garden. But when she lived in Lebanon, they had a big move to have a community garden. And they had a donated block where they had raised houses. And it was a huge area in Lebanon. And people could pay to have a plot. And even if you paid for a plot, like my sister's intention was to donate it to the food bank or whatever, it was not fenced in. And so over time, people learned where it was. And even though it was going to go to the poor or go to the people that needed help, people were stealing what was in it when it was ready to be harvested. And people got so frustrated that they just quit having the garden. So, you know, even with a fenced in garden, if somebody wants to go over a fence, they will. And if you unlock it in the morning and no one's there, someone will slip in. And so I think security of what you're trying to do needs to be addressed at the get-go, how you're going to protect your efforts.
Yeah, anytime there's a public community garden or anything like that, I mean, there's always a risk of tomfoolery going on overnight and thefts and things like that. But, you know, there's not a lot that can be done, but I'm glad to hear it's a fenced in area. That will help a little bit.
And it goes back to that local leadership that you mentioned, Kelly, too. So, you know, something that is checked on regularly and managed, that not just left on its own.
Well, so during the day, it's city property. It's on the well. It's by the, it's across from the recycling center. So people will be coming and going all the time with that. And it's also, the Public Works building is across the street where the recycling center is. So our guys are in and out, but they're not going to know who actually is a member of the community garden and who's not. But the vet's office is there. So like I said, during the day, you will have, during the normal week, you'll have people in and out of that street.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
I like that combination lock idea because anybody that is invested in it can come and go and know that it needs to be locked, and then nobody can slip in between clients coming to work.
And I don't think is lit right now. I don't remember if somebody said we needed to get a light.
There may be a light on the well, but since there's electricity there, maybe we could get some motion lights put up in that area.
But the fence so the deer can't get in, that's a good thing. And it's tall enough where they can't jump it, so they're little masters at that. So.
Has that land been used for anything else in the past, or is it just old pasture? Or
yeah, no, we've
whatever?
just maintained it. We mow it because the well is there, and our guys have mowed it for the 10 years that I've worked here. As far as I'm aware, that's all that's been there. It's industrial drive. There's a business on either side of it, but it's the road that goes to the
Sewer lift station.
The sewer lift station is down there, and the cave is right there. So you have people come in that go to the cave all the time too. But
is it that spot right across from the vet clinic?
yes,
Across
well,
Industrial Drive?
not directly across from it. It's
Just to the east.
To the east a little bit.
Oh.
There is a building directly across. There's a business directly across from the vet's office.
Yep.
So it's in between that and the other. There's another building. There's a driveway right there that goes into the cave.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But we fenced it in 2 years ago, so it's been fenced and the guys maintain it.
Well, Kelly knows my gardening ability, and which is why I would defer to her on all these things. But here we are in May, and really with, you know, CDC guidance and some of that, we're not really getting out in big groups or anything by any means. So the spring planting, spring growing season, we're late on all of that. What sort of timetable do you see as working best? Is it really you spend this time this summer to pulling everything together, preparing it to maybe do fall planting, or what do you see?
She's not talking.
Is that a question for Kelly? David,
That was
or
for
me?
Kelly. She's
Oh,
on.
okay. Yeah, so it's really not too late to plant. I mean, as far as summer vegetables, you know, I always recommend that people plant about mid-May in this area, just because we can get late freezes and, you know, it's happened before. So I always advise about mid-May to plant summer vegetables. So you certainly have time. And maybe, you know, like I was saying earlier, maybe this first year you just kind of start small and put in a few raised beds and plant some summer vegetables, and then you can expand next year. But, you know, let's see, what is this, May 1st? So you still have, you know, a couple of weeks to, you know, I don't know what you were thinking as far as the time frame, but you still have some time, and a lot of people will even plant into late May, early June. So you do still have time to plant this year.
Well, it's not, I mean, we talked a lot in Leadership Ash Grove, even about the importance of having small wins. And so there's nothing wrong with starting small. You already show you have some activity. You're already creating a win situation to build upon then for the fall or for next year even. Nothing wrong with that at all.
David, I think you could get some volunteers to work on those mineral barrels and line some up, and the goal to be to have some summer produce like tomatoes and cucumbers or something you could donate to the food pantry over the summer, and maybe that could, you know, generate some more interest. I mean, if you're doing this as a philanthropic, everybody could just pitch in and help see that it's watered and taken care of. Those mineral barrels are going to be a pretty easy maintenance for this year. And in the meantime, you could get the soil ready for making it bigger with fall stuff that you want to add to it.
Yeah.
So food pantry is once a month. They distribute once a month. And so we are moving forward with the People's Pantry is coming to Ash Grove, and that they've got it built already, and we will be getting that sometime whenever the world back opens up here. We planned on having a basket on the bottom of the People's Pantry where people could put produce. So the reason I brought it up is when food pantry is only once a month, it's hard to, unless you have people that you know are going to need produce. The produce is only going to be used or distributed one day a month, which kind of makes it hard when you're doing cucumbers that you have to pick every single day and find somewhere for them to go. So this little People's Pantry will be a good option for some of that stuff. And that's supposed to be located right outside of City Hall, right in between us and the museum building, right in our little cubby right there.
So that'll be an additional food pantry in Ash Grove?
It's just a People's Pantry, so it's like 3 feet by 4 feet. I mean, it's a very small.
Oh.
It's just an immediate. You know, if you need something right now, it's available for you. And we're having it like in the space between City Hall and we own the next building. So it's kind of private. So if you're embarrassed or don't want the world to know that you're in need, it's available for you at any time.
Is there something like that down at the Christian church too?
There is. And it's been there for how many years, and I didn't even know it ever existed until we started talking about the People's Pantry.
Yeah.
But this is the first People's Pantry in OCAC is supporting that and bringing it to us. And then they voted. They went around to all the outlaying outside of Springfield and determined that they were going to start with us. So this is the first trial run on that, which we're really excited about.
You do bring up a good point, Melissa, about the frequency of food distributions at your current pantry. And if, like you're saying, when cucumbers are coming on in the summer, you know, you should be picking them once a day, maybe.
Twice a day, probably.
Yeah, often. So the group will want to think about what are some other outlets for that produce if it is to be donated, whether it's a senior center or senior apartments or, you know, other places.
Yay.
Pat's with the Sunshine Center, so she's excited about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, wherever it can be used, you want to make sure that, you know, the produce has a good place to go and it doesn't have to languish, you know, and go bad potentially. So
I do think the food pantry, and I don't know if Deanna's on here, or Melissa, you probably know, but they do respond to people other than that one day a month.
Yes, they do.
Right, they do. They do. If you need emergency
Yes.
food, you can get it at any time.
Yes, it's by appointment only as well. I mean,
But I'm
by
just saying,
appointment as well.
that's the day when you have, you
Right.
know, 200, or not 200, but 100 people lined up outside and, but it's, like I said, you know, when you're in cucumber season and you got to pick 40 cucumbers every day, otherwise you have zucchinis.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say at the Sunshine Center that we have an awesome walk-in cooler refrigeration unit. So I think we could probably help you store, you know, some of that produce so it doesn't go bad in heat, which would give you a little more time to, you know, take care of it and get it distributed without it going bad sitting in the heat for 2 days in a row or something.
Right. So we have
So-
options for that type of thing towards the, you know, when we're getting into harvesting time. John, do you have any idea of layout and that type of thing? John?
Before he gets, this is Mark. I just want to add real quick. That gentleman mentioned the senior housing, and we have taken stuff from our gardens to the nursing home, and seeing how exciting some of those people get when you bring it in is really awesome. So I think we just can't forget the housing by the park and the housing down between Tower and Exchange.
Right.
Because not
Yeah,
all
so
those,
we have options.
yeah, there's lots of options to be able to bless people with the produce.
That's true.
I
Both of
have
those
a-
locations have a community room where you can bring in produce. For those
And I have a senior lady that loves to go door to door and provide to the people that she, you know, neighbors with at the senior center. So I think some of my seniors that once we can get out and do things again will want to be a part of this, whether it's helping get it handed out or coming to help in the garden area. I think I've got some seniors that'll want to be involved.
So
Absolutely.
contract, do the people that decide they want to have a space, is it usually a contract that they have to sign, or how does that work?
One of the links that David sent around is for a set of documents that's called the Gardener's
good.
Welcome Packet.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Right.
So
great.
it's not
Okay.
it's not the toolkit, it's the welcome packet. And at least when we do individual plots for families or individuals, whichever, they do often agree to a set of guidelines. And the guidelines that I've included in that welcome packet are meant to be edited and changed to meet your own local needs. And then
Okay.
there's also often a short application that's meant to be simple and really collect only the information that you need to collect. But the application and the garden guidelines go together in that hopefully when somebody signs on the dotted line, they understand, you know, basically how the garden works and some of the expectations as it relates to upkeep and things
Okay.
like that. So that is quite common. That is not necessarily used when it's a shared space and you have people who are growing plants and produce together for donation. I haven't really seen like the use of a contract or an application. You may still have some guidelines though, right? Like if you're trying to outline maybe the schedule or participation in work days or whatever you're trying to communicate, you could still have some guidance. But people wouldn't necessarily have a contract
Okay.
if they're growing together as a group and doing the communal effort.
What about release of liability? Is that something that the city would want someone to sign?
It's in the application and the guidelines that I've provided. The city may want to look at that though and make it consistent with some of your other release of liability statements if you use those types of statements for other purposes. What we have is pretty just kind of general language for that.
And that was supplied to us, David? Was that in something that we
Was.
got?
It was, but I've circled it as a reminder to send it to you specifically and for everybody on this group with this different heading. So it
Okay,
jumps out at you.
all right.
David, how much Zoom time do we have left, or is there a limit?
There's no limit. We got all the Zoom time we need, I guess.
Well, is it true that after Monday, you can have 15 or fewer people as long as you maintain social distancing together?
That is the county guidance.
Yes.
That is correct.
15, yes.
So I'm
We
thinking,
can get started.
yeah,
We
We
can
could-
get a plan together of how we're laying it out, and stuff like that. Like, we need to kind of put it out there and see how much interest, who's all actually interested in being involved in actually having a garden, so that you can kind of determine spacing, or is it usually just a 10 by 10 and there's your spot, and if you want 2, then you get 2.
You know, what is a good size for the raised garden?
For raised garden, I prefer like a 4x12 for a
Okay.
raised garden, just because most folks can reach across a 4-foot span from either side to reach the middle.
Right.
12 feet long, that's somewhat random, but it's kind of standard
Okay.
length as well.
I think in Lebanon, their plots were the length of landscape timber. You know, the
So more
size
like a-
or the length of a landscape timber. I don't know if that's 12 feet or what.
Probably 8.
8, yeah.
Unless you
that's-
put 2 together and then it's 16.
True.
So I don't know the exact dimension, but they use landscape timbers to identify each person's plot.
Okay. So when you were saying, when Jennifer walked back in here, I was thinking, you know how we did the welcome bags for new water customers? We could get donations and do a little welcome bag for anybody that wants to be a part of the garden as well. Like, you might have a pair of gloves in there and a couple packets of seeds, or, you know, little markers to mark your whatever you're putting in, you know, labels and stuff. That would be kind of fun too, but.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a cute idea.
Have you already sent out your May newsletter?
She was working on it yesterday and today. I don't know if she,
Yeah,
yeah, I think
it
she
has
printed it.
went out.
I think there might be something in there about the garden.
Good.
Would this group that's on the call today, would you all be sort of considered like your local kind of leadership team, or the garden committee, or whatever you wanted to call an organizing group, or would there be others who would be involved in that discussion?
Might be a few other people that weren't able to join right now.
Mm-hmm.
I know Marcia'd like to be a part of it, but she works during the day, so I know she wasn't able to. Not saying that we aren't working. Sorry.
Hey guys.
John was on earlier. He would want to be a part of that too.
I'm here.
Marcia?
Oh, Marcia is here?
Yeah, this is me.
Phone number. Okay, there you are. You were awfully quiet all this time. Apparently, I'm
Well,
the
I've
only one who
been-
talks.
No, I've been mixing pain creams and stuff, so I've had me muted so you guys didn't hear my machine running.
So we may have a few more. Most of us in here, we're in the leadership class.
Sure.
We can have tape measures, and we can measure and whatever you're talking about. The gazebo's down there too, so it's not really big enough to keep a whole lot of social distancing.
They're also saying too that, like, some of the new research on the COVID-19 virus is showing that it doesn't really live much in the outdoors, that transmission is really low in outdoor settings, and that it's indoor settings where the virus is more frequently transmitted. So an outdoor meeting to me sounds great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Get some sunlight.
Next week, we can try something next week or try to schedule something for next week.
Why not I will follow up with something to this core group through email that would include that link that we've specifically talked about, that I told Melissa I would send to her. And then I include the contacts and the information from MFA and Liberty Utilities. They'll offer to lend some aid as well. And then maybe you can, that's an easy tool, the email to keep people in the loop and organized. That's great. If you want to do it another way, that's fine. I just want to encourage some action items and moving forward. So however we can do that. And, you know, maybe the group may want to have a garden chair or someone who we think is going to be that local leader of the garden. And that may or may not be somebody that's in this group right now. I don't know.
I don't know. Not me, no. I'm kidding.
So at least the next action item is to put together some sort of meeting in person at the garden. Is that
Sounds
what
like
I'm
a
hearing?
plan. Is John still in here, or did he actually leave?
He dropped off. I don't know if he lost connection or if something came up. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I think this was a really informative meeting. I'm glad you put this together for us. Thank everybody for joining.
I'll download the video of this meeting. We can make that available to others that want to understand what's going on too. They'll be able to watch the video.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Are we missing anything? Did we totally skip over something that you all think we should have touched base on?
Not really from my perspective. I think that this was an excellent first meeting and getting some ideas out there. And I think when you're on the site talking about some of these same issues, it'll be a lot more kind of concrete and folks can kind of make decisions and chart a course. So I would just refer you to the materials and maybe look through some of the materials that are provided, and those will probably spark some ideas and questions and things like that, and just kind of help you along.
Okay.
Well, very good. Thank you, Bill, for your time.
You're welcome.